Council Leader Thys stood before the great communication array, her translucent hands shaking as she prepared to send what might be her people's final message to the galaxy. The Void Swarm had consumed 3 more outer colonies in the past week, and their biomechanical ships now moved toward the core worlds of the Zilani Confederation. Every defensive fleet they sent was either destroyed or worse, absorbed into the growing nightmare that devoured everything in its path. "Are you certain about this broadcast, Leader Thys?" asked military advisor Krex, his gentle voice filled with concern. Like all Zilani, Krex was tall and graceful, with large eyes that reflected the soft blue light of their command center. His people had evolved from peaceful herd animals on their garden world, and war was something they understood only in theory. Thys looked at the tactical display showing red markers spreading across their territory like a disease. Each marker represented a world consumed, billions of lives converted into more swarm biomass. "We have no choice, Krex. Our weapons barely scratch their hulls, and every ship we lose makes them stronger. If any species in the galaxy has weapons that can stop them, we must ask for help." Science Minister Vel approached with a data pad in her thin fingers. "The message is ready, Leader. It contains our star charts, everything we know about the swarm's capabilities, and our offer of technological exchange for military assistance. I have also included our cultural database, so any responding species will understand our peaceful nature." Thys nodded and activated the array. Her voice carried across space on subspace frequencies that every known civilization monitored for emergencies. "This is Council Leader Thys of the Zilani Confederation. We face extinction from an enemy we cannot defeat. The Void Swarm consumes our worlds and turns our people into components of their biomechanical collective. We offer all our scientific knowledge and technological resources to any species willing to provide military assistance. Our coordinates and tactical data are included in this transmission. Please, if anyone receives this message, we are running out of time." The message shot into space at faster-than-light speeds, carrying the desperate plea to every corner of known space. Thys closed her eyes and whispered a prayer to the ancient spirits of her homeworld. Somewhere out there, she hoped, was a species with the weapons and courage to face the swarm. 3 weeks away, in a different part of the galaxy, the human vessel UNS Liberty drifted through deep space on a routine patrol mission. Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair, reviewing supply reports and crew schedules. At 35, Morrison had spent half his life in space, working his way up from a junior officer to commanding one of Earth's most advanced ships. He was a compact man with dark hair, and the kind of steady gaze that came from making life or death decisions in the black void between stars. "Captain," called Communications Officer Amy Foster from her station. "I'm picking up a transmission on the emergency frequencies. It's not human, sir." Morrison straightened in his chair. First contact protocols were something every human ship captain dreamed of and dreaded in equal measure. "Put it through the translation matrix, Amy. Let's see what we're dealing with." Dr. Lisa Harper hurried onto the bridge, her long red hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. As the ship's xenolinguist, she had spent years studying theoretical alien languages and communication patterns. This was her first chance to put that knowledge to real use. "The transmission is complex, Captain. Multiple data streams including what looks like star charts and technical specifications." The main screen flickered to life, showing a 3-dimensional star map with pulsing red indicators. Then came the voice, translated by the ship's computers into clear English. The desperation in the alien words made everyone on the bridge fall silent. "This is incredible," Harper whispered, her fingers flying over her console. "They're called the Zilani Confederation. This data includes their entire first contact package. Cultural information, technological specifications, even biological data about their species." Chief Engineer Rick Santos joined them on the bridge, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. Santos was a large man with calloused hands and the kind of practical intelligence that kept ships running in the depths of space. "What's this about? Some kind of swarm, Doc?" Harper pulled up the tactical data on her screen. "According to this, they're facing something called the Void Swarm, biomechanical entities that consume organic matter and convert it into more of themselves. The Zilani have lost multiple star systems already." Morrison studied the data with the cold assessment of a military officer. The Zilani had provided detailed information about their enemy, probably hoping that any responding species would know how to fight such creatures. What he saw was disturbing. The swarm appeared to be a growing infection that turned everything it touched into weapons against the living. "How far away are they, Amy?" Morrison asked. Foster checked her calculations twice before responding. 3 weeks at maximum burn, Captain. The transmission is 18 hours old, so whatever's happening there is probably getting worse. Morrison looked around at his crew. These were good people, trained for exploration and first contact, but also ready for the dangers that space could throw at them. Earth had built the Liberty as both a diplomatic vessel and a warship, because humans had learned that the universe rarely gave you the luxury of choosing your battles. "Dr. Harper, I want you to prepare a response transmission. Tell them we received their message and we're coming to help. Rick, I need you to prep the ship for extended combat operations. Amy, send a message back to Earth Command letting them know we're responding to an alien distress call." Harper looked up from her console with concern in her brown eyes. "Captain, there's something else. I accessed their cultural database and they've classified Earth as a Class 12 death world. In their system, that means a planet so dangerous that most species couldn't survive there. They might not be expecting the kind of help we can provide." Morrison smiled grimly. Growing up on Earth meant living with hurricanes, earthquakes, predators, and a dozen other things that could kill you without warning. If these Zilani came from a gentler world, they had no idea what humans were capable of when pushed to fight. "Then I guess they're about to learn what Deathworlders can do," Morrison said. "Set course for the Zilani system, maximum burn. It's time for humanity to make its first impression on the galaxy." The Liberty's engines roared to life, pushing the ship toward a destination none of them had imagined that morning. Behind them, Earth continued its orbit around the sun, unaware that its children were about to announce humanity's presence to the galaxy in the most dramatic way possible. In the Zilani system, Thais waited by her communication array, hoping for any response to her desperate call. She had no way of knowing that help was already on the way, or that her people's salvation would come from the last species in the galaxy they would have chosen to ask. The UNS Liberty dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Zilani system, with a flash of twisted light. Captain Morrison immediately felt the familiar weight of command settle on his shoulders as the ship's sensors began feeding information to the bridge crew. What they found was worse than the distress call had indicated. "Jesus Christ," whispered Lieutenant Commander Paul Grant from the tactical station. Grant was a thin man with sharp eyes who had spent his career studying enemy movements and finding their weak points. "Captain, I'm reading massive biomechanical constructs around the fourth planet. They're literally eating one of the moons." On the main screen, the void swarm revealed itself in all its horrible glory. Kilometer-long creatures that looked like a nightmare fusion of insect and machine wrapped around the smaller moon, their drilling appendages boring deep into its surface. Clouds of smaller organisms swarmed around the feeding site, carrying chunks of consumed matter back to larger vessel creatures that pulsed with organic growth. "Amy, try to establish contact with the Zilani government," Morrison ordered. "Rick, I want full power to shields and weapons, but keep them powered down. We don't want to look aggressive during first contact." Dr. Harper worked frantically at her linguistics station, her computer systems reaching out across space to find the Zilani communication frequencies. "I've got them, Captain. They're responding on multiple channels. It looks like they have a central government complex on the third planet." The main screen shifted from the feeding swarm to show the interior of what appeared to be an alien command center. Morrison had seen many strange things in his years of space travel, but his first sight of Council Leader Thys still caught him off guard. She was nearly 3 meters tall but looked fragile as glass, with skin so translucent that he could see the gentle pulse of her circulatory system underneath. Her eyes were larger than his fist and filled with an intelligence that seemed both ancient and innocent. "I am Council Leader Thys of the Zilani Confederation," she said through the translation system. Her voice carried harmonics that suggested she was used to speaking to large groups. "Are you the beings who responded to our distress call? I'm Captain Jake Morrison of the United Nations ship Liberty, representing Earth and humanity. We received your message and came as quickly as possible." Morrison watched Thys's reaction carefully. Her large eyes widened even further, and she seemed to shrink back from the screen. Behind her, other Zilani moved with quick, nervous gestures that reminded Morrison of startled deer. "You are humans," Thais said, and her voice carried a tone that Morrison couldn't quite identify. "From the Class 12 Deathworld Terra." "That's right. We understand you're facing some kind of enemy that's consuming your worlds. We're here to help." Second Zilani appeared on screen, this one wearing what looked like military insignia. "I am Military Advisor Krex. Captain Morrison, our databases indicate that your species evolved on a world with gravity twice the galactic standard, atmospheric, composition that would be toxic to most life forms, and predator species that weigh several tons." Morrison glanced around his bridge crew, noting their confused expressions. Dr. Harper had warned him that humans might be seen as dangerous, but he was beginning to understand just how different human and Zilani evolution had been. "That's accurate, though I'm not sure why that matters right now. What we need to focus on is stopping this swarm before it consumes more of your people." Grant had been quietly scanning the swarm creatures during the conversation. "Captain, I'm detecting some interesting patterns in their behavior. They seem to operate as a collective, but there are distinct, ship-sized entities within the swarm structure." A third Zilani joined the conversation, identified as Science Minister Vel. Her voice carried the precise tone of someone used to dealing with complex data. "The void swarm reproduces by consuming organic matter and converting it into additional swarm components. They have already assimilated 17 of our colony worlds and absorbed 3 defensive fleets into their collective." Morrison felt his crew tense at this information. The idea of enemy forces that grew stronger by consuming their victims was something that would keep any soldier awake at night. "What kind of defensive capabilities do these creatures have?" "They adapt their shielding to whatever weapons are used against them," Krex explained. "Our energy weapons were effective initially, but within hours they had developed resistant defenses. Their biomechanical nature allows them to evolve countermeasures faster than we can develop new attacks." Chief Engineer Santos leaned forward from his station. "Captain, if I could get some biological samples, I might be able to find weak points in their structure. Living things always have vulnerabilities, even when they're mixed with machines." The suggestion seemed to horrify the Zilani. Thais spoke quickly to her advisors in their own language before turning back to the screen. "You wish to study swarm tissue directly?" "It's standard procedure," Dr. Harper explained. "Understanding an enemy's biology is essential for developing effective countermeasures." Morrison could see that the Zilani were struggling with concepts that his crew took for granted. Their evolution on a peaceful garden world had not prepared them for the kind of tactical thinking that survival on Earth required. "We'll need detailed information about the swarm's behavior patterns, their reproduction cycle, and any previous encounters your people have had with them," Morrison said. "Lieutenant Grant will coordinate with your military advisor on tactical matters." Grant nodded and began establishing data links with the Zilani military systems. As information flowed between the ships, Morrison could see his tactical officer's expression growing more serious. "Captain," Grant said quietly, "their entire military doctrine is based on defensive formations and non-lethal suppression. They've never fought an enemy that wanted to completely destroy them." The cultural gap was becoming clear to Morrison. The Zilani had evolved as prey animals who survived through cooperation and avoidance. Humans had evolved as persistence hunters who survived by outthinking and outlasting their enemies. The two approaches to survival were so different that they might as well have come from different universes. "Council Leader Thais," Morrison said carefully, "we're going to help you stop this swarm, but our methods might seem unusual to your people. Humans have experience fighting enemies that want to destroy everything we care about." Thais was quiet for a long moment, her large eyes studying Morrison's face through the screen. "Captain Morrison, our databases suggest that humans are extremely dangerous, but you have traveled across space to help strangers. We do not understand your species." Morrison smiled grimly. "We don't understand yours either. But maybe that's exactly what we need to beat this thing." On the tactical display, more swarm creatures moved toward the inner planets of the Zilani system. Time was running out, and first contact was about to become a baptism by fire for both species. The first contact between human weapons and the Void Swarm happened 3 hours after the Liberty arrived in the Zilani system. A group of smaller swarm scouts had broken away from the main feeding cluster and moved toward the human ship, probably drawn by its unfamiliar energy signature. Captain Morrison watched the tactical display as 6 biomechanical entities approached his vessel. Each one was roughly the size of a fighter craft, but moved with the fluid grace of living creatures. Their surfaces rippled with organic patterns that shifted and changed as they drew closer. "Range in 30 seconds, Captain," reported Lieutenant Commander Grant. "Permission to engage?" Morrison nodded. "Fire when ready, Paul." "Let's see what these things are made of." The Liberty's defensive cannons opened fire with sharp bursts of coherent energy. The weapons had been designed to fight other human ships in the brutal conditions around Earth, where battles were decided by whoever could deliver the most damage in the shortest time. Against the swarm scouts, the effect was devastating. Thean, first energy blast caught a scout center mass and tore it apart in a shower of biomechanical debris. The second and third shots destroyed 2 more before they could react. The remaining scouts tried to adapt their shielding, but human weapons cycled through different energy frequencies faster than the creatures could evolve defenses. On the communication channel, Morrison could hear the Zilani observers making sounds of shock and distress. What humans considered a minor skirmish had just demonstrated firepower that exceeded anything in the Zilani military arsenal. "Captain," Dr. Harper said from her station, "I'm reading massive distress signals from the Zilani command center. I think we just scared them as much as we impressed them." Morrison opened the channel to Thys. The Zilani leader appeared on screen with her advisors clustered around her, their large eyes wide with what could only be described as terror. "Council leader, we've cleared the immediate threat from your system. The scouts have been destroyed." "Captain Morrison," Thys said, her voice trembling, "your weapons completely annihilated those creatures. Our most powerful defensive systems could barely damage them, and you destroyed them in seconds." Military Advisor Krex stepped forward, his movements jerky with stress. "Those were Type 3 swarm scouts. They have adaptive shielding that should have protected them from energy weapons. How did you penetrate their defenses so quickly?" Morrison glanced at Grant, who shrugged. "Standard rotating frequency protocol. We hit them with different energy types faster than they could adapt. It's basic tactics when fighting adaptive defenses." The silence from the Zilani side stretched uncomfortably long. Morrison was beginning to understand that what humans considered basic military knowledge was completely foreign to a species that had evolved without large-scale warfare. "There's something else, Captain," Grant said quietly. "I'm detecting a larger swarm construct moving toward the outer edge of this system. It's carrying what looks like captured Zilani vessels." Morrison made a decision that would have been automatic for any human commander, but clearly shocked the Zilani. "We're going to intercept and attempt a rescue mission. Paul, plot an intercourse course. Rick, prepare a boarding party." Chief Engineer Santos nodded and began gathering equipment. Sergeant Danny Cox appeared on the bridge, a compact man with scars on his hands and the kind of calm demeanor that came from surviving dangerous situations. "What's the mission, Captain?" "Rescue operation on a compromised Zilani vessel. Unknown. Number of survivors, hostile biomechanical entities, and will be operating in a contaminated environment." Cox nodded as if this was routine. "Standard boarding gear, then. How many hostiles should we expect?" Morrison looked at the tactical display. "Unknown, but assume heavy resistance. This is a first contact situation, so we need to be extra careful about protecting any survivors we find." The casual way the humans discussed boarding a ship filled with hostile aliens clearly disturbed the Zilani observers. Thys spoke up, her voice filled with something between admiration and horror. "Captain Morrison, you're planning to send your people onto a vessel that has been partially consumed by the swarm? The biological contamination alone should be fatal to most species." Dr. Kate Lewis stepped onto the bridge at that moment carrying a medical scanner and looking completely unfazed by the discussion. Lewis was a small woman with steady hands and the kind of practical confidence that came from treating injuries in combat zones. "I've been analyzing the biological samples from the destroyed scouts," Lewis said. The swarm organisms use an interesting mix of organic acids and metallic compounds, definitely toxic to most life forms, but nothing that should be immediately fatal to humans. I can prepare countermeasures for the boarding party. The Zelani stared at her through the communication link. Science Minister Vel finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. You're saying that swarm biotoxins would not kill your people immediately? Lewis looked puzzled. Well, they're definitely not good for you, but humans have pretty robust immune systems. We evolved on a world where lots of things tried to poison us, so we developed some strong defenses against biological toxins. Morrison could see the Zelani trying to process this information. To them, humans were revealing abilities that seemed almost supernatural. The truth was simpler and more frightening. Humans had survived on a world where everything from the air to the water to the native life forms was actively trying to kill them. The Liberty moved toward the compromised Zelani vessel at full speed. As they approached, the ship's sensors revealed the true horror of what the swarm did to captured vessels. The elegant Zelani design had been corrupted with organic growths that pulsed with alien life. Biomechanical appendages extended from the hull like infected wounds. I'm reading life signs inside, Grant reported. Definitely Zelani, but the biosignatures are weak. Looks like maybe a dozen survivors in the central section. Morrison turned to Cox. Danny, take your team in fast and hard. Get those people out before the swarm can fully integrate the ship. Cox nodded and left the bridge to prepare his boarding party. Morrison watched him go and realized that the Zelani were witnessing something they had never seen before. Humans preparing to risk their lives for complete strangers simply because it was the right thing to do. The boarding shuttle launched from the Liberty's bay, carrying Cox and 5 other humans toward the infected vessel. As Morrison watched them go, he wondered if the Zelani would ever understand that human aggression and human compassion came from the same evolutionary source, the drive to protect the group against anything that threatened it. On the communication channel, Theiss spoke quietly. Captain Morrison, why are your people willing to risk their lives for Zelani they have never met? Morrison thought about the question for a moment. Because that's what you do when someone needs help, Council Leader. Where we come from, we learned that survival means taking care of each other even when it's dangerous. The shuttle disappeared into the docking bay of the corrupted vessel, carrying human courage into the heart of an alien nightmare. The boarding shuttle docked with the infected Zelani vessel with a grinding crash that echoed through both ships. Sergeant Danny Cox and his team moved through the airlock wearing full environmental suits, their weapons ready for anything they might find inside. The interior of the Zelani ship was a nightmare of organic corruption. What had once been clean, curved corridors designed for graceful alien movement were now filled with pulsing biomechanical growths. The walls oozed a thick fluid that hissed when it hit the floor, and strange appendages reached out from every surface like the arms of buried creatures. This is Cox to Liberty, the sergeant reported through his communication system. We're inside the target vessel. The corruption is worse than expected, but our suits are holding up. Moving toward the life sign readings now. On the Liberty's bridge, Captain Morrison watched the team's progress through their helmet cameras. The Zelani observers were silent as they witnessed humans moving through an environment that would have killed most species within minutes. Cox's team found the first survivors in what had been the ship's medical bay. 3 Zelani engineers were huddled in a corner, their translucent skin pale with shock and their large eyes wide with terror. One of them, a young female named Zephyr, was trying to tend to an injured companion with shaking hands. Easy there, Cox said, his voice gentle despite the hostile environment. We're here to get you out. Zephyr looked up at the humans in their bulky environmental suits and made a sound that the translation system couldn't interpret. The humans looked like mechanical monsters in their protective gear, but they were moving with careful precision to avoid harming the frightened aliens. Can you walk? Asked weapons specialist Laura Kim, kneeling beside the injured Zelani. Kim was a small woman with quick reflexes and an expert knowledge of combat medicine. She began checking the aliens' vital signs with practiced efficiency. The biotoxins, Zephyr whispered. How are you still alive? The contamination level should have killed you already. Cox looked around at the corrupted walls dripping with alien poisons. Our suits are handling the worst of it, and humans are pretty tough. Let's worry about getting you somewhere safe. The rescue operation became more complex when Cox's team discovered that the swarm had begun converting part of the ship's crew into biomechanical components. Living Zilani were trapped in organic pods, their bodies being slowly transformed into something that was neither fully alive nor completely machine. Jesus, whispered one of Cox's team members. They're still conscious in there. Morrison's voice came through the communication system with cold authority. Extract everyone you can, but don't take unnecessary risks. If someone can't be saved, don't let the team get trapped trying. This was exactly the kind of decision that horrified the Zilani observers. To them, the idea of leaving anyone behind was unthinkable, but they also couldn't understand how the humans could function in such a contaminated environment. Dr. Lewis had been monitoring the biological readings from the boarding party. Captain, the swarm organisms are trying to adapt to our presence. The biotoxin levels are increasing, and they're developing new strains that might be more effective against human physiology. Morrison made another decision that demonstrated the difference between human and Zilani thinking. Rick, prep the demolition charges. We're going to blow that ship apart as soon as our people are clear. Science Minister Vell spoke up from the Zilani Command Center. Captain Morrison, that vessel contains valuable research data and technological systems that could help us understand the swarm better, and it also contains enough biomechanical contamination to infect your entire system. If it reaches your homeworld, Morrison replied. Sometimes you have to destroy something to keep it from spreading. Cox's team managed to extract 12 Zilani survivors from the infected ship, carrying them through corridors that were actively trying to trap and convert them. The final evacuation required the humans to fight their way through biomechanical defenders that erupted from the ship's corrupted systems. Laura Kim found herself face-to-face with something that had once been a Zilani crew member, but was now a twisted fusion of organic tissue and mechanical components. The creature moved with unnatural speed, its converted limbs reaching for her with appendages that dripped conversion fluid. Kim's response was immediate and lethal. Her weapon discharged 3 times, each shot placed with surgical precision to disable the creature without causing unnecessary suffering. It was a mercy killing performed by someone who understood that some fates were worse than death. The rescued Zilani were brought aboard the Liberty and immediately taken to the medical bay. Dr. Lewis began treating them for biotoxin exposure, while the human crew worked to decontaminate the boarding team. Zephyr, the young Zilani engineer, watched in fascination as the humans went through their post-mission procedures. They moved with practiced efficiency, checking each other for contamination and discussing the mission with the kind of casual professionalism that came from surviving dangerous situations. How do you do it? Zephyr asked Dr. Lewis as she administered treatment. How do you function in environments that should kill you? Lewis looked up from her medical scanner. Practice, mostly. Humans have been surviving in hostile environments for thousands of years. We learn to adapt, to take calculated risks, and to protect each other when things go wrong. The Liberty moved away from the infected Zilani vessel as Rick Santos triggered the demolition charges. The ship disappeared in a brief flash of light, taking its biomechanical contamination with it. On the main tactical display, more swarm constructs were moving toward the inner planets of the Zilani system. Morrison opened a communication channel to Theiss. Council leader, we've extracted your people, but the main swarm force is still advancing. We need to coordinate our efforts if we're going to stop them from reaching your homeworld. Theiss appeared on screen with her advisors, her expression a mixture of gratitude and fear. Captain Morrison, your people saved 12 of our citizens from a fate worse than death. But your methods are so different from ours that we struggle to understand how to work together. Morrison nodded. I know this is difficult, but we don't have time for a gradual cultural exchange. The swarm is moving, and we need to combine human tactics with Zilani technology if we're going to win this fight. Cultural advisor Ben Clark stepped forward. Clark was a patient man who had spent years studying alien psychology and communication patterns. Council leader, perhaps we could start by having your people work with our technical teams. Our approaches are different, but our goals are the same. The rescued Zilani survivors had been watching the humans work together with growing amazement. Zephyr spoke up from her medical bed. They risk their lives for strangers without hesitation. They work together like a single organism when facing danger. I have never seen such cooperation combined with such individual courage. Morrison smiled grimly. Where we come from, courage and cooperation aren't separate things. They're both part of survival. And right now, survival means stopping the swarm before it consumes everything you care about. The Liberty and the remaining Zilani vessels formed a defensive line as the Void Swarm's main force approached the inner system. Two species that had evolved on completely different worlds were about to discover whether their combined strengths could overcome an enemy that had consumed entire civilizations. The main Void Swarm force arrived at the edge of the Zilani homeworld system like a living nightmare made of metal and flesh. Hundreds of biomechanical constructs moved in perfect coordination, their surfaces rippling with organic patterns that pulsed in rhythm with some alien heartbeat. The largest creatures were the size of human battleships, while smaller organisms swarmed around them like antibodies protecting a diseased body. Captain Morrison stood on the Liberty's bridge, studying the tactical display with the cold focus that had kept him alive through a dozen dangerous missions. Beside him, Council Leader Thys appeared on the communication screen, her large eyes reflecting the fear and desperation of her entire species. Captain Morrison, Thys said, her voice steady despite the approaching doom. Our remaining defense, fleet numbers only 8 vessels. Your ship is powerful, but we are facing an enemy that has consumed entire star systems. Morrison nodded grimly. I won't lie to you, Council Leader. The odds are not good, but humans have survived worse situations by being smart, being tough, and being willing to sacrifice everything to protect what matters. Lieutenant Commander Grant was coordinating with the Zilani military commanders, sharing tactical data, and trying to find weaknesses in the swarm formation. Captain, the Zilani ships have superior sensors and their energy manipulation technology is incredible. If we can combine that with our weapons systems and tactics, we might have a chance. The young Zilani engineer Zephyr had recovered enough from her ordeal to work alongside Chief Engineer Santos. Despite the trauma of her capture, she was determined to help defend her homeworld. Santos found her technical knowledge impressive, especially her understanding of energy field manipulation. Your people think in 3 dimensions, Santos told her as they worked on weapon modifications. Humans tend to think more in terms of brute force and overwhelming firepower. Maybe we can combine both approaches. Dr. Harper had been working with Science Minister Vell to analyze swarm communication patterns. Captain, we think we've identified their command structure. The largest organisms seem to coordinate the smaller ones through bioelectrical signals. If we can disrupt those signals, we might be able to break their formation. The battle began when the swarm sent forward scout waves to test the combined human-Zilani defenses. Morrison had positioned the Liberty at the center of the defensive formation, with Zilani vessels providing sensor support and energy field protection, while the human ship delivered concentrated firepower. The first exchange revealed how different the 2 species' approaches to warfare really were. The Zilani ships used precise energy beams that could slice through swarm armor with surgical accuracy, but they fired slowly and carefully to avoid causing unnecessary destruction. The Liberty's weapons, designed for the brutal realities of human conflict, unleashed devastating barrages that turned entire sections of swarm creatures into floating debris. This is incredible, whispered military advisor Krex as he watched the human ship's performance. They're not just fighting the swarm, they're destroying it faster than it can adapt. But the swarm's true strength lay in its numbers and its ability to learn from each encounter. As the battle continued, the biomechanical creatures began developing countermeasures to both human firepower and Zilani precision weapons. What had started as a successful defense was turning into a grinding battle of attrition. Morrison made a decision that would have been unthinkable to the Zilani, but was perfectly logical to a human military commander. All ships fall back to the inner system. We're going to let them follow us and then hit them where they're weakest. Captain, Thys said with alarm, you're allowing them to advance toward our homeworld? Trust me, Council Leader, sometimes the best defense is making your enemy think they're winning. The combined fleet retreated toward the Zilani homeworld, drawing the swarm deeper into the system. Morrison was betting everything on a strategy that required precise timing and absolute trust between two species that barely understood each other. As the swarm advanced, Grant identified the massive command organism at the center of their formation. "Captain, if we can take out that central creature, the rest of the swarm should lose coordination." The problem was reaching the command organism through hundreds of defending biomechanical creatures. Morrison turned to Zephyr and Santos, who had been working on a desperate plan to combine human weapons technology with Zilani energy manipulation. "It's ready, Captain," Santos reported. "But someone will have to get close enough to the target to deploy it manually. The energy fields required for this weapon can't be projected over long distances." Morrison didn't hesitate. "I'll take a shuttle team in. Paul, you have command of the Liberty." "Sir," Grant protested, "that's a suicide mission. The contamination levels alone will be lethal, and you'll be flying into the heart of the swarm formation." Morrison looked around his bridge crew, seeing the same determined expressions he had come to expect from humans facing impossible odds. "Maybe. But if we don't try, everyone in this system dies anyway." Zephyr stepped forward, her movement still unsteady from her recent trauma. "Captain Morrison, I'm coming with you. This weapon requires someone who understands Zilani energy systems to activate it properly." The final assault began with the Liberty and the Zilani fleet launching a coordinated attack on the swarm's outer defenses. While the biomechanical creatures were focused on the main battle, Morrison's shuttle slipped through the chaos toward the central command organism. The weapon that Santos and Zephyr had created was unlike anything either species had built before. It combined human understanding of destructive force with Zilani knowledge of energy manipulation, creating a device that could disrupt the bioelectrical signals that held the swarm together. Flying through the heart of the swarm formation was like navigating through a living hell. Biomechanical creatures the size of buildings writhed around them, their surfaces crawling with smaller organisms that tried to attach themselves to the shuttle. Morrison piloted with the same steady calm he had shown throughout the crisis, making split-second decisions that kept them alive in an environment that should have killed them instantly. "There," Zephyr said, pointing at the massive central organism. "That's the command node. If we can place the weapon at its core, the energy disruption should cascade through the entire swarm network." Morrison guided the shuttle into a docking appendage that was trying to capture them, using the swarm's own biology against it. They deployed the weapon manually, working in environmental suits while biomechanical defenders swarmed around them. The explosion was not a simple detonation, but a cascading wave of disrupted energy that spread through the swarm like a virus. One by one, the biomechanical creatures lost coordination and began drifting apart. Without the central command signals, they reverted to simple organisms that could be picked off by the combined human-Zilani fleet. In the aftermath of the battle, Morrison and Thys stood together on the Liberty's bridge, watching cleanup operations begin. The immediate threat was over, but both species had learned something important about each other. "Captain Morrison," Thys said quietly, "we understand now that human aggression comes from the same source as human compassion. You fight so fiercely because you care so deeply about protecting others." Morrison nodded. "And we've learned that Zilani precision and wisdom can make human strength much more effective. Maybe that's what the galaxy needs. Different species working together, each contributing what they do best." Dr. Harper was already preparing reports for Earth Command and the Zilani Council, documenting the first successful cooperation between humans and an alien species. The battle against the Void Swarm had ended, but it was also the beginning of something much larger. 3 months later, the joint human-Zilani station orbited the Zilani homeworld, serving as headquarters for the New Galactic Defense Initiative. Children from both species played together in the station's common areas, watched over by parents who had learned that evolution shapes capability, not character. Captain Morrison had been promoted to admiral and given command of the growing fleet of ships that protected peaceful species from threats like the Void Swarm. The humans had found their place in the galaxy not as conquerors, but as guardians who stood between civilization and the darkness that threatened to consume it. The galaxy was a dangerous place, but it was no longer a helpless one. Deathworlders had answered the call for help, and they had changed everything.